So I salute you all again. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening. I beg you subscribe and like the videos. So basically today the major topic of concern is about promise to marry. We get under family law 1. Realize that family law is a bit easy to pass, but also easy to fail. So when you look at promise to marry is making like a promise that I'll marry you. Unfortunately or fortunately, you fail to marry someone's daughter and son. Now that someone's daughter and son sues for breach of what? Promise. You get, you promised me to marry, but you have failed to do what? To marry. So you are answerable at the end. You get. But however, we shall look what could amount to a promise to marry or to a breach of promise to marry and what couldn't. You get. We have the leading case we have Tumwine Richard versus Charikunda Fortunate. This is the leading case that was recently decided in Uganda, whereby I realized that it was this Tumwine Richard that, this defendant who is Charikunda Fortunate, the defendant, had promised to marry Tumwine Richard. And Tumwine Richard had invested a lot of money in Fortunate. You get. That he even financed his education at the LDC. You get. But at the end, Fortunate was like saying, I cannot marry Richard Tumwine because he's an old man. But at first when Richard was investing the money, Fortunate was saying nothing. He had promised that he'll marry Richard. Now Richard also goes to court saying that Fortunate breached a promise A promise to marry. You get. At the end, he was compensated what? Damages. You get. Because realize that he invested in education, because they met in a teaching school. He invested in Fortunate, in have other studies at the LDC, to study diploma in law. Then afterwards, Fortunate refused. You understand? He refused to marry Richard, saying that he was an old man. By the end, the court awarded Richard what? Damages. You get. All the receipts, because Richard presented all the receipts whereby he was supposed to be what? Paid his money that he had invested in Fortunate. That is the leading case so far, the recent decided cases on promise to marry. Then we go further, we have also the case of Lalok versus Oboya. Lalok versus Oboya, this is whereby we see that the plaintiff sued for breach of promise to marry. The defendant had promised to marry the plaintiff, whereby even the plaintiff realized that he got pregnant and was just away from school. But afterwards, the defendant wrote to the plaintiff saying that he won't be in position to marry what? To marry the plaintiff. The plaintiff sued for breach for promise to marry, whereby he said that he got emotional what? Damages, and he was awarded what? He was awarded damages as a result for breach of promise to marry. But when you go further, realize that there is a case of Woodman versus Woodman. Under that case of Woodman versus Woodman, realize that here the plaintiff, his suit for breach of marriage didn't succeed. Reason being, first of all, he wrote a letter to the defendant, and also his what? The second brother-in-law also wrote a letter to the defendant, and also the pastor where the plaintiff prayed from wrote a letter to the defendant. All of them were asking his position, whether he'll marry the plaintiff. But however, the defendant didn't answer any letter. And in the layman's understanding of the plaintiff, he thought that silence amounted to acceptance, or it amounted to a promise of what? A promise to marry. Then after a while, realized that still this defendant, the plaintiff, got a ring of the what? Of the defendant. Do you know that you got a ring when the defendant had not given it to what? To him. But for him getting a ring, he thought that now the ring has sealed it all. It shows that the man is ready to marry me. So when the man failed to marry the plaintiff ran to the courts of law, saying that the defendant was in breach of what? was in a breach of promise to marry. You get? But the court held that it did not find it satisfactory to amount to a promise to what? To marry. You get? So basically, once you are dealing with promise to marry, the intention must be clear. You get? There is no imagining that that guy does this and this and this, he's going to marry me. The intentions must be what? Clear for a promise to amount to a breach. Mere implied ways cannot amount to what? To a promise to marry. And also, a promise to marry must not be against public policy. What do I mean by public policy? Realize that there is a case of Piers versus Hunt. Piers versus Hunt. Under this case, realize that the defendant promised to marry the plaintiff on the death of his wife, which was contrary to public policy. You can't find me, I've lost my husband, then you are asking, you are like promising me to marry me on that one, on that day. It is contrary to public policy. You get? So basically, in the case of Piers versus Hunt, they held that the promise to marry made by the plaintiff on the death of his wife amounted to what? Was contrary to public what? Policy. Hope we are clear. Then when you go, still that is under promise to marry. But remember, we have remedies under promise to marry. And these are the remedies that I'm going to highlight. When you look at the remedies, realize that we have the remedy of what? Of damages. And the good cases that are Rock versus Oboya. All the cases, even Fortunate, Richard versus Fortunate, that case also damages was portrayed. Damages, that is one of the remedies under family law. Then you also have the return of certain things. Someone may ask, you return my things. You get? For example, there is a case of Cohen versus Seller. The case of Cohen versus Seller, realize that the plaintiff demanded the return of the ring. Cohen versus Seller. The plaintiff demanded for return of the ring. You get? Under the element of promise what? Under the breach of promise to marry. You get? So realize that promise to marry is a kind of sketchy topic, but you must understand what can amount to a promise to marry, what can amount to a breach to promise to marry. You get? So that is all about what? That's all about promise to marry. Promise to marry under Family Law 1. Like my videos and subscribe. Thank you for listening.